Hello, welcome to this video of where I'm building this 20-foot sailboat, catamaran sailboat in my garage. And I'm going to show you in this video how I use this 6mm marine plywood to strengthen the hull. So first of all, the hull starts out with a piece of the 6mm plywood, and then I am epoxying another layer onto this. So I'm going to show you how I go about epoxying the two pieces of plywood together for added strength. All right, let's get to it. The first thing to understand is what kind of epoxy that I'll be using. And well, I'm using West System, and this is their epoxy, and they have the epoxy resin that you can buy, and then different kinds of hardeners. And because this is in January, and the temperatures here in Texas are a little cool, not as cold as in some parts of the world, but we regularly get down right now into maybe the mid 30-degree Fahrenheit at night, just above freezing. And inside my garage, I can keep the temperature in here easily above 40 degrees Fahrenheit without even worrying about turning on the heater. So because of that, I am using, for at least right now, the fast hardener. And the fast hardener can cure up to, or at least I should say, it can cure down to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is just above freezing. I think that's maybe somewhere around 5 degrees Celsius. And what I'm doing is I'm mixing the resin and the hardener, and then I'm adding filler. And the filler that I'm using for this is their 403 microfibers. And these work out really well. I was using previously the 406 colloidal silica, and I find that the 403 microfibers work a lot better. And what I'll do is I will mix these up in with this, and I just use a standard plastic spoon. And if I'm putting, let's say, 10 pumps of epoxy and 10 pumps of hardener, I'll mix that with 5 heaping spoons of the filler. So I get a good mixture. It's not really thick. It's still quite a bit runny, but I find that it spreads well, and I think it soaks into the plywood quite well, which is what I want. So yeah, so the next thing I'm going to show you is laying down the various pieces of plywood. I'll show you how that to clean up the squeeze out of the epoxy on the edges, and how also to clean it up with a scraper if it hardens before it can get cleaned up. So that's what we're going to go through in this video. So at the end, we will have, this is the hull side here, and we've got it. You can see several pieces of the plywood that have been epoxied onto the hull side, and down here is the last piece that is currently sitting underneath the sandbags waiting for it to cure. So I've completed the epoxying of this thin strip of plywood that was cut off from the hull side originally. It's a 20 feet long section, about 5 or 6 inches, maybe about 6 inches wide here. And I try to wipe off the epoxy as it is squeezing out before it dries, but even so, there's a little bit of epoxy that is squeezed out. And so what I do is I'll go along next and with the scraper, and I'll scrape off this little bead of epoxy here, because I want the next sheet of plywood to be able to come right up against this sheet of plywood. The other thing that I did is for this epoxying, I used the fast hardener, because right now the temperature here in the garage is, I don't know if you can see this or not. Oh, there's a good angle. It's almost 60 degrees in the garage right now, and the slow epoxy that I've been using so far is really only good down to 60 degrees. Anything less than that, and it's not going to cure properly. So I have been, for the cooler nights, been running a heater. But for this epoxying. It's just getting down very regularly below 60 degrees. So I use the fast hardener, which it can cure down to 40 degrees. So that's fine. I can keep the garage at or above 40 degrees without even using the heater at all. And at this temperatures, even the fast hardener gives me plenty of working time to put this on. This took, to put this 20-foot long piece of plywood down, was about an hour to spread the epoxy out and lay this board down and get it in place. So that was plenty of time with the cooler temperatures to still be able to use the fast hardener. Alright, so I'm going to continue scraping the epoxy squeeze out and get this edge here cleaned up for some more of the plywood reinforcement to go down next. For the next piece of plywood, I have the cutoff from the previous hull, which already has the angle from the rear of the boat that's cut into it, and this will sit here just like this. So that's where that piece will go, and after I wipe everything down, I will go along with the pencil and mark the location of the board along here and along here, so that when I'm putting the epoxy down on the plywood that's underneath this board, I kind of have an idea of the boundaries that the epoxy should go, so that I'm not wasting any epoxy and I can get it right up to the edge very easily. So this will be the next piece of plywood to be epoxied onto the hull side. So it's been about an hour since I put down this next piece of plywood, and it's had plenty of time now for the epoxy to start squeezing out. And you can see it, here's a bunch of epoxy that's squeezed out along here. And what I find works really good is to take just a piece of wood. This is a shim, and I will come along like this and just scrape this epoxy off like that, and then wipe that off on a napkin and just go along and scrape all of the epoxy off so that it's nice and clean, and then that prevents a lot of work on the cleanup later. Because when the next board comes down, I don't want a big, a lot of squeeze out of epoxy there. I want the next board to be able to fit right up against this one. So it's important to get this epoxy out now before it hardens, because otherwise it's a lot harder to use the scraper later to get it off. So this is how I lay down the epoxy for the plywood panels that we're reinforcing the hull side with. And I first apply the epoxy to the plywood panel that's going to be epoxied on, which is over here. And by doing this and sitting it right next to the hull side where it's going to go, then any excess epoxy, after I spread it and coat this piece of plywood, I can use the scraper to scrape it all off onto this plywood. And after I spread it all out, I'll use the notches on the spreader, kind of like a trowel, and make sure that the epoxy is evenly coated across both of the sides that are going to be joined together. So the next step here is to I'll take this and I will flip it over and then put the plastic on top of it, so that any squeeze out does not stick to the sandbags, and then put the sandbags on top to apply a even and steady weight to the entire panel while the epoxy cures. Alright, so yeah, I think that will be about all for this video. There's been some good tips in here, and you've got to see some of the insight into how I go about joining together the various pieces here, especially some of these plywood panels, and taking care of the squeeze out as well. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get this video posted. All right, bye.